Ooh. Right there, look at that, right there.
Look at that head shake, man.
Oh, man, that's what we came up here for.
Okay, live in 3, 2, 1.
All right, Mikey, here we are. Mike Hehner joining us today. Mike is one of my favorite people of all time. I sincerely mean that, Mike. Yeah, real character in the industry. We've worked together for a long time. Mike has a wealth of knowledge about a number of things. A complicated man, as our coworker Jeff Simpson likes to say. So why don't you give us a little background on yourself here, Michael?
Yeah, I like to fish, right? That's why I'm here. I like fishing for everything. I've been fishing since a kid. Went to school for fisheries management and did not go that route. Went the publishing route. Started working out of school at a book company called Hunting and Fishing Library. Met Bill Lindner, and that's where it all started. And the next thing I know, I'm up here in Brainerd working for Lindner Media.
Yeah.
30, 40 years later. So, no, I like fishing. I like filming. I guess my job here is to, field produce some shows and film some shows and manage Bill Lindner's stock photo library. So I got my hands in a little bit of everything. So
yeah, you're kind of downplaying it, and you head up the efforts we do with Lund, the ultimate fishing experience TV show we've done for years, and obviously now they've got a YouTube channel where you're kicking out content all the time with that. So
Yep. So me and Billy and Brian do that. We do that and help you guys with the shows and do whatever else you need to do around here, right? So
yeah. So we're going to talk panfish mania today, Mike, because
Yes.
I know you're passionate. You're a passionate multi-species angler, really, but you've got a soft spot for panfish, and so. As we're looking at the panfish season, to me it seems like they get a lot of attention. Obviously, in the winter months, again in the spring when the fish are shallow, they're spawning, and relatively, high amount of pressure in the fall when they end up in basins where they're easy to find. But summer seems like it's that overlooked time frame for a lot of anglers, and I really want to dive into that topic to kick things off, is that summertime pan fishing.
Yeah. So summertime pan fishing can be challenging for a lot of anglers, right? I mean, it's, you have the spring when they move in the shallows after ice out and they're in the back bays and everybody can find them. They move out to their spawning areas up here May, mid to late May into June, and they're easy to find bluegills and crappies in their spawning areas. But after they're done spawning, they move out to sea, and into big weed beds or everywhere, and they're really hard to find. So, but they're still catchable then, right? So, and that, to me, that's one of the funnest times to find them because nobody's fishing for them, and they can be predictable, but you can get onto some really nice fish, and you're not fighting with people to get at these fish. You just kind of got spots to yourself. So, but there is a little nuances to getting them, as far as catching panfish in the middle of the summertime. So
let's take a step back here. Where are you looking? First of all, like, how are you determining where to fish? So we're located here in central Minnesota. Of course, panfish are abundant throughout the country, but how are you choosing a lake to target? And obviously crappies and bluegills are two different critters altogether. But
yeah, I'll just use some lakes around here for an example. We have moderately clear with deep weed bed lakes, and we still have a lot of lakes with that good deep cabbage weed and coontail and stuff. So about the time they're getting done spawning and moving out, the weeds are getting big, growing more, and it seems like they find these big weed beds or weed flats to hang out in most of the summer. So I guess I just look for really good weed beds that might be not far from where they spawn to begin with, and then it's a matter of if you're after sunfish or crappies, you fish them a little differently. But once it might take you a while, if you're on a lake with the big, huge weed beds, it might take you a while to find them. But once you do find them, they're there, and you can kind of hone in on them a little bit more and fish them. So, but when they're in the weeds, they're kind of tough to catch, right? And they're hard to see with electronics too. So it's like you can find the weeds with the electronics, but it's hard to see the fish sometimes. So you kind of I guess all the spots I fished when I was younger was just like my dad took me, said, well, this weed bed has crappies in it. So you'd go there. Well, then once you find out the kind of weed beds they're in, then you can replicate that to other lakes, Every lake's different, obviously, but it's like good, big, thick weed beds, or if you're on lakes or rivers without weed beds, brush piles or any other kind of cover they're in. But I personally have not found lots of them in the summertime suspended. It's like they're in and around some kind of cover, right? So
Obviously, there's different weed types. So as you're looking through the spring, if you're looking at many of the western lakes, that's got the curly leaf pondweed, which comes up really early. In southern Minnesota has that too. So that's obviously a great cover type for a certain amount of time, and then it's
dies off.
Impenetrable and dives off. So are you really looking, that right after spawning? So you're saying you're looking for the best vertical standing plant growth, whatever the weed type is, and then will you follow that out then deeper through the summer as the edges develop a little bit more?
Yeah, so I just go back to, again, the old school stuff, like my dad always called the big cabbage or the Potamogeton weeds, crappie weeds. Like, so I'd say mid-June, all of a sudden the tips of those weeds would stick up in the water. You'd see the little tips, and it's like, there's the crappie weeds. So you'd find the crappie weeds, you'd find where the edge of them are, and then you just started fishing in that area, into them a ways and then out from a little bit. But it seems to me that, from everything I've seen, they just are in and around them most of the summer. So it's a function of getting your bait in and around them without getting hung up all the time. But
how are you targeting bluegills versus crappies in the summer? Are they often mixed?
I've found them often mixed, and it seems the crappies ride a little higher in the water column. So I'll give you an example. Last early June, I was out on a lake within a half an hour of here, and I was targeting the crappies, but I knew there was big sunfish in the lake, so I was pitching little plastics, catching crappies, and then I caught a sunfish, and I'm like, well, there must be sunfish here. So I switched gears. I went to a slip bobber rig with a little jig and a little chunk of worm, and instead of fishing it over and around the weeds, I pitched them right into the middle of the weeds and down into the weeds more, so they were like down, I'm going to say it was 10 feet deep, right? So I'd put the bobber 7 feet deep, and I'd flip it into the weeds, and then I started catching sunfish. So they were in the same area, but in a different column of water, I guess I would say,
Sure.
But I've caught them together too, but I've seen them separate like that quite a bit, where the sunfish stay deeper, the crappies ride higher.
So many of the lakes in the Midwest, like if you're looking for big crappies, you're looking for trophy-sized bluegills, like those to me become a lot more difficult to find as time passes. So with technology today, I know we use the Onyx Fish app for a number of things. Like, how are you using, basically technology to find the most likely places that would have quality size bluegills and crappies?
Yeah, I've been, of course, messing around with forward-facing sonar like everybody else, and you can find good cover with that as much as anything. But a lot I would just use side imaging and 2D sonar to find the weeds and the weed edges, just driving around, and here's a shallow bay or a medium depth bay of a lake, and just go driving into it and see where the weeds start coming up on 2D and side imaging, and that shows up really well. So, and from there, then I'll just slow down and look for fish. But I say, okay, this 100-yard stretch of weeds looks like it should hold fish. So I'll start fishing, and you'll know pretty quick when they're there. So
yeah,
it seems like so.
And that side imaging to me is still one of the best tools ever for understanding bottom composition and cover. And one little piece of advice I throw out there, if you're looking for panfish in those weedy areas, especially muddy, soft bottom areas, is crank your sensitivity to the max. And you're able to get those little white signatures that are the panfish
correct
that are in those areas. And if you've got your sensitivity too low, what often happens is that the weeds and the fish look the same.
Correct.
So that tool can actually show you fish in weed beds, because it can be a really daunting task just to cover down on where to find those fish.
Right. And then that's a good tip, because like, you might go a long time and be looking and say there's no fish here, right? But then you do catch a fish there. So then it's like, okay, now I know there's fish here. So let's mess with the electronics settings on there until I can see the fish. And then once you get used to seeing what those fish look like on your graph, then you can know in the future, right? But it's like, I think initially people will look and they say, well, there's no fish here, but you're catching fish, so how do I see them? So then you just have to mess with your settings, right?
Yep.
To find them in the weeds. So, yeah.
And I think it's cool that the one great thing about panfish is they love to school. So if you get one, you know you're on to something.
Right.
So you get that instant reward, and the confidence builds.
Where there's one, there's more.
When there's one, there's more. So back to actually finding lakes, Mike. So how are you finding lakes that would have potential for big fish?
Well, fortunately for us in Minnesota, we have the DNR, which has done studies on all the lakes, and there's lake surveys on almost all the lakes. And they've done, they break down where all are, what's in the lake and how big. And then now we're working with our one partner, Onyx Fish, and they've taken it a step further. They've been able to take the DNR data, and they break it down for you even more into size classes, history of the big fish and all that, and what's in the lake. So it's pretty telling if you can go to a survey on Onyx Fish and look for, you can selectively pick out trophy potential fish, right? So you can say, I want to go catch big bluegills. So I'm going to look on this survey, and is there any fish in the 10 to 11 inch range, right? If you see a lot of fish, tons of fish in the 7 to 8, few in the 8 to 9, and nothing in 9 to 10, you're like, well, there might be a few good bluegills there. Or the same with crappies, you want to look for that 12 to 14 inch, right? That would be, I guess, a big crappie. So if you look, Onyx Fish will have it broken down into the different size structure, and you can just say, okay, I want to look for trophy potential crappies. And if the survey in the past shows 12 to 14 inch fish, that's a good lake to check out, right? But if it doesn't show anything over 9 inch crappies, you probably want to avoid that one for big fish, but just that would be more for numbers for keeping. So
Panfish are present in basically every body of water,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
so it's not like people are going out hoping that they're going to go. I mean, most anglers that are experienced are hoping to go out and catch 200 5 to 7 inch bluegills, right? Or a bunch
Right.
of 6 inch crappies. So identifying those key areas is pretty pretty darn cool. What are some of the other presentations that you're using for summertime crappies, or kind of your go-to?
So I would say my favorite thing to do is to pitch little plastic jigs in and along the weed lines, like a 16th up to an 1/8 ounce jig with like a 2 inch plastic, with a little tube jig, a little fluke jig, and no weight on it. And just, instead of jig, that's the one thing that I guess I can say about it that people might overdo is they jig the baits too much for crappies. I mean, to me, the key is you're pitching that bait out, you're letting it sink down to a certain depth, and then you're just reeling really slow, maybe pulsing it a little, but you're not jigging it, you're not snapping it or nothing. You're just reeling, and it's just crazy because with the tackle or the rods and reels we have now today with a braided line out, they just jump, when the crappies hit it. So, but I think if you're jigging the bait too much, you're going to attract the littler bait, those hammer handle pike and stuff, and the fish don't chase it as much. But just a nice cast, sink, reel, and it's really simple, but you have to have the confidence to do it, and the confidence to know that there's fish there. But
It does seem simple. You want to catch crappies, you cast out a jig into a weed bed or on a weed edge and, reel it in. But there's so much involved in really managing where that bait is in the water column.
Correct.
And to me, that seems one of the biggest hurdles for anglers to overcome. So you're, of course, matching the type of plastic that you have on. How much drag does that plastic have?
Mm-hmm.
What's the weight of the jig? And then, what kind of line are you using? So, for me, I'm curious to get your take on it. But for me, like you mentioned a jig like a 32nd sometimes, a 16th, and maybe at times an 1/8 if you're fishing big crappies. But the Moon Eye is like hands down, the VMC Moon Eye, like my favorite crappie jig
absolutely, yeah.
ever. And then in terms of plastics, often, as I do it more, it seems like, what's ever handy, a tube is great. I love that little crappie minnow, but there's a zillion different varieties. So what is what is Mikey's go-to?
The two I like, the little tube and the little straight tail. Those are, two of the best plastics for me. I don't use the curly tails that much. I don't know why, but I'm just not a fan of them. But a tube and a straight tail on a moon, like a 16th ounce moon eye, is hard to beat, right? So, and then I don't think the color matters as much. People look into color a lot for the crappies, but if you have a fishy looking thing down there, if it's chartreuse and green or if it's a minnow color, if they're there, they're gonna bite it. So that's been my experience. So, for the crappies anyhow. So
yeah, and I think they're a little bit different. I would 100% agree with you that it seems like the biggest thing for crappies is getting the bait close to them, and again, back to your point of not jigging it too much. I mean, just floating it over, maybe like a little dip on the retrieve. But bluegills, they're a fish that, to me, I've of course caught lots of bluegills on artificials, but meat is neat with gills. It seems like, huh?
100%. You can say I'm going to go get them on plastics, and you'll go get a few. But if you want to catch sunfish, you need some kind of meat on there. And I think year round. I know someday, like up when they're in the shallows in the spring, they're a little more aggressive, and when they're on beds maybe. But if you're day in and day out, if you're trying to get bluegills, you need a worm. Wax worm, something on there. Would you agree? It's just like it's got to, because they're just different, and crappies seem to be more, impulse striking versus sunfish will sit there and scrutinize something, and they'll sit there. You've seen it ice fishing. They'll sit there and look at your bait for, it seems like a minute before they'll decide to bite or not. But if there's a piece of meat on there, that's going to push them over the edge.
So we've been talking about swimming jigs primarily, but that's obviously not the only delivery system.
Correct.
So most people that I see out pan fishing are fishing with corks.
Yep.
So there's a couple styles. One is, having a fixed float. The other is a slip float. Dive into why for both of those.
It's weird. It's probably personal preference, but I am a fan of the fixed float for fishing like 6 feet and less. And I just think like whatever bait you have on, if you have that fixed float up there, then you can like work the bait. The float will stay on top. The line won't go through the bobber. So you just kind of you can work the jig along or whatever you're using, and you can cast it pretty good in that. And then once you get over 6 feet, I think you almost have to have a slip bobber just to get things down there farther. But I don't know. I know we've fished together, and we both have the one clip float on with a little weight on the end, and you can cast it a little better. And if there's wind, it isn't as big of a factor, but I think you can just put more action into the bait if with a fixed float. So
yeah, I agree. I'm a big fixed float. Those are the real high end ones that are like a 3-pack for $3.
Yeah, I know they really put you on.
Yeah. So, but they're great. They work really, really good. And to the slip bobber thing, I definitely agree that it's a great presentation for fishing deeper water. But I think in recent years we've spent a lot more time fishing with drop shots as opposed to slip corks. To me, there's an efficiency with that, and that if you're fishing in 12 feet and the fish are a foot off the bottom, a drop shot puts your bait a foot off the bottom, and you can fish in 18 or 20. You're not adjusting the cork. So are you doing a fair bit of that too?
I'm sort of behind the times. I haven't done a lot of it. I know you guys, I've seen it, especially with the bluegills. Fish are in 12 feet, they're a foot off the bottom. You can just drop right on top of them, and it's like, what a better way to put it in front of their face and have direct contact with them. But I've not done it a ton, to be honest with you, so I've just stuck with the.
Is that because bass fishermen use it, and you're upset?
Pretty much.
The bass world is infringing on your little panfish.
It's a bass technique, so I won't do it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I have done it, and I'm telling you, it's totally legit. Even though Mikey is anti-drop shot, so
not not. I'm behind the times, Jer. I'm too old, right?
Oh, so you're not. So, and I don't really drop shot that much for crappies necessarily, but it seems like it's more of a bluegill technique where they're a lot more bottom oriented.
Correct.
And the crappies tend to be a lot more suspended.
Yep. Yeah, and that's a good point on the bottom oriented. And like I've been talking about the weed beds and stuff and brush and that, but it seems as you get on into the summer, and I know you've probably seen it too, but the big bluegills, the real big ones, they almost act like a walleye more as you seem to get into the summer months. So like from end of June into the fall, it's like I've heard 100 people tell me I was out dragging slow death for walleyes on my favorite lake, and man, I caught a 10-inch bluegill, you know, and it's like in 22, 23 feet of water. Or I was out on a walleye reef corking, and I caught 3 walleyes, and then all of a sudden I got a pound bluegill. It's like, so those big bluegills, they'll be in the weeds still, but a lot of them in the lakes, if they have the structure, it's crazy. They'll be out on walleye structure. They almost are a different critter, wouldn't you say? I mean, that's what I've found anyhow. So
Yeah, you hear. You definitely hear. Seems like more big bluegill reports from walleye guys, and they like using rocks too. But I mean, they're on those sand to mud transitions. But yeah, to your point, they just seem to be a lot more focused in on what's ever coming up out of the bottom in those deeper areas in the summer than crappies.
One of the guys we're going to have on here later, Hayes Baldwin, he guides a lot on vermilion, and he said he's actually caught them on little baby crankbaits trolling for walleye. So it's like they're out where the walleyes are, caught a big bluegill. So, but one thing I was going to mention about throwing those jigs for crappies that I think that's one of the, maybe, I don't know if it's a stigma or people don't do it as much as they're using too heavy of equipment, right? So it's like it's to cast a 16th ounce or a 32nd ounce jig freewheeling like that is kind of tough with a normal, like if you have a walleye setup or a universal setup and it's just heavy line, it's really hard to fish them, right? Hard to tell a bite. So we've been, of course, blessed to be able to use some really good equipment here with Daiwa and St. Croix, and there's some combos we've kind of put together for panfish that are like make all the difference in the world for casting, presenting baits and detecting bites, right? So I know it's hard to throw a little jig, but if you're using something with a 6-pound braid and a 7-foot rod, you can do it, right? If it's a rod designed for it.
Yeah, let's hear Mikey's favorite combo.
So favorite combo would be a 7-foot one piece, that high-end Panfish Legend Elite.
Yeah, that
7 foot
medium light extra fast.
That would
light
be
extra fast, whatever.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's a little bit. It's a nice rod, but I would say a 7-foot to 7 3 one piece Panfish rod with a 1,000 size reel, like a Regal LT. They're they make a new really smooth one. You can put enough line on there to cast, and a 1,000 size is a little lighter. With that, perfect for that combo, but it's lighter in your hand. And then 6-pound braid is hard to beat, and I know Suffolk makes a couple kinds. One's nano braid, but the new one is revolve, and it's different than the 832, but it's real silky smooth, and you can. Gosh, I don't know. You can throw it a mile. I mean, with the right situation, a 16th ounce crappie jig, you can get it to wherever you want. And then when you're doing that reeling technique, you're just watching your line and you just see the line jump and it's like you're on it. But if you're using a big heavy mono or a bigger walleye stick, you're going to miss a lot of bites and just not be able to present the bait like you would want to, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I would agree with that same setup. I mean, that's what I'm using for pan fishing most of the time, and it's cool how the rods, reels, line have really advanced into specialized equipment for not only the species but the actual presentations too. I definitely want to highlight that point about the braid that you made, and if people have not fished with Suffolk's Nano Braid, or the new one is Revolve, and I fished Revolve for a season last year, and it's amazing. The thing about that line is it's light. I'm not talking in terms of pound tests, but like it just doesn't weigh. It's not dense at all, right? So there's just no drag when you go to throw those light baits with that rod and that little bit bigger size spool on a 1,000. I mean, it just flows, and you can throw that stuff a mile. You take that same jig and spool up with 6-pound fluorocarbon or 4-pound mono or whatever it is, you're going to lose at least a third of the casting distance, if not more.
Absolutely.
You know, and you don't have the memory, you just don't have the issues, and you can fish it for years, And then you use a fluorocarbon leader most of the time?
I have been, and I know, I think some situations, even in deep or darker water, you probably wouldn't need to with crappies, but I always like to, just for the pike factor too. But I know a lot of people have trouble tying like a leader that thin. I do. I know exactly those things. How do you do it? And it's just hard. So I've been using like the smallest barrel swivel they make, I think it's a number 12 barrel swivel, and for panfish you don't need a big long leader like you would for bass for presenting baits. I maybe go to a 18-inch to 2-foot. So a little braid to a barrel swivel to a leader to the jig is all you need, and it's easy to switch out baits then and stuff. And because tying braid to a jig directly is kind of challenging in itself too. So
yeah, it can be too. And I'm with you. I usually use a fluorocarbon leader unless you were fishing like in bulrushes or something like that earlier in the spring. You might tie direct, and then you're just not having to deal with break-offs and that whole deal. So no, those are great points, and appreciate you bringing that up on the panfish scene. And it does just make your angling experience a lot more enjoyable. You're just more effective having the right gear on board. So
it's kind of cool too, because now some of the lure companies are making baits out of that Elastec as well. And I know I was messing around with one last year, and I think I caught 40 to 50 crappies on one jig and one tail.
Oh,
it's
come
just
on.
like, no, I'm not lying. Just kept putting it back on, and they just stay together. But yeah, even on normal ones, you can probably get 10 fish. But the braided line too, though, using a color, right, is
yeah, great point.
just for watching your line, right? That's half the battle with watching that light stuff. I mean, a lot of times you won't feel the bite; you'll see the line jump, and that's sort of everything, right? So using a bright, I actually like, I'm colorblind, so I don't all see all colors good, but the white line works good for me, but then the lime green or whatever, but bite detection, right?
Big time. Yeah, especially swimming jigs and that kind of thing when, in the crappies, I mean, they powder it and they're often pushing the bait towards you, you know, or up. So it's like you just see that skipping with that braid too. It's just start reeling. I mean, you just kind of reel fast and pull. Like you don't need to crack them or do anything like that. And
it's really simple fishing.
It is.
But like you brought up earlier, it's the trick is finding them, right? So if you don't have a grandpa spot to go to, if you're versed in your sonar, you can find the good weeds and you'll eventually find the fish. So it's a fun time of the year to fish for crappies.
It is.
And not a lot of people do it. So
a friend of ours, Luke Ronastrand, he guides up on Vermilion, and so Luke and I were up there last fall, not muskie fishing, of course, we're big muskie heads, but we did some crappie fishing up there, and man, I was floored on the quality of the crappie fishery up there, and we did run into some really nice gills too, and if people aren't familiar with Lake Vermilion, it's in northeastern Minnesota, and it's really a Canadian shield lake. And those water bodies to me are like, smallmouth bass, walleye, northern pike, muskie. You're just whatever. Panfish aren't on the radar, but
you don't think of it, yeah.
Yeah, you've spent a lot of time over the years, obviously traveling the entire country, but you guys make trips up to that northeastern part of the zone, Lake Vermilion world, and maybe you don't even want to share how good it is up there. You're trying to keep that secret.
No, actually not. So we've been going up there hunting for years and started fishing up around that Crane Lake, that whole northern border waters area, and I've got differing opinions on how the crappies got there. I think they were in a couple of the lakes, but I think there was some midnight bucket stocking in some of. But the bottom line is, all those lakes up there, if you take Rainy all the way down to Namakan, Sandpoint, Cabotogama, all those lakes, those shield lakes, are stuffed full of crappies. And some have big bluegills too, like you said, but the crappie fishing is crazy. I was just up there about a month and a half ago ice fishing and went out on that chain of lakes, and it was like, the guys are out in that hole out there, and we went out there, and there's 8 locals out there and fishing in 35 feet of water, just pulling up just great crappies, But in the summertime, like you said, there's not some of those lakes really don't have much of anything for weeds. It's rocks everywhere. So the lakes we've been fishing, like from mid-May or late May into the summer, you almost fish them like walleyes. It's like, okay, there's a rock pile out there. Let's go take a look at it. And you mark fish, and you think they might be walleyes, and you're not catching them, and then you mistakenly catch a crappie, then you switch to crappie gear, and all of a sudden, holy mackerel, we're just catching tons of these big crappies on an 8-foot rock pile, and it's like nothing, a weed nowhere in sight,
Yeah.
So it's a different fishing, but there's a lot of really nice crappies up in that whole area, so that system. So
I remember the first time I ran into crappies up there was actually on Pelican Lake, which is nearby that whole zone, and we were rolling through, and it was like, what? We were smallmouth fishing, but it was like, what? Oh, whoa! There's like crappies
On the rocks.
all over the
Yeah.
rocks. It was just like one of those eye opener things. Because we'd been fishing weed cover too, and hadn't really seen much for panfish. This was more in the spring, but it was remarkable. And another time I can remember, we were up on Wabagoon, and you were putzing around, and you rolled over a 12-foot rock pile, and
Yep.
that water's dirty, and bingo, big crappies.
crappies, yeah, there's fish. What are they, right?
Yeah. So
No, I think, but getting back to Pelican too, that's always been a traditional big panfish lake. But we were up there one time filming, and I've seen some stuff on these rocks, and they were crappies. They were spawning. They were bedded, big black male crappies bedded in 4 foot of water over rocks. 'Cause
yeah.
that's what there is.
While we're on this topic of northeastern Minnesota, that Lake Vermilion area, Pelican Lake, when you were a young man, you were up there cleaning fish professionally.
Yeah, I think I put a knife through quite a few sunfish back in the day. So I always like to reminisce. I know you guys get sick of me talking about it, but when I was in junior high and 9th and 10th grade, I worked at a resort on Pelican Lake, Bratton's Resort, which doesn't exist anymore, but dock boy, what a great job for a kid that likes to fish, right? So I spent 2 summers up there, gave up my summer baseball career for 2 summers, and went up there and did that. And the cool thing is the guy I worked for let us, like there was 3 of us, and every third day you'd have an evening off, so we got to fish. He had a boat for us, and we could go out and fish. So every third day I got to go out and fish hard, And that lake back then was full of huge panfish. I mean, it sounds, like a story, but it's like guys would bring in limits of the limit back then was 30 fish, and they would bring in limits of 9 to 10.5-inch bluegills. So I made. First year I charged a nickel a fish. The second year I upped it to a dime a fish. But I sat there for hours every night cleaning tons of I don't know how many sunfish I've cleaned. I've got a fillet knife at home that's got a permanent bend to it because I've cleaned so many. But I guess the point you're probably getting to is back then it was like there's big sunfish were everywhere, and you couldn't do anything to them, right? Well,
Yeah.
the limit was 30, and families would come up from Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, and farmers, and that was their fishing trip for the season, once a week, and they wanted fish, and they'd bring their half-gallon cardboard milk cartons, and mom, dad, and 4 kids, and that's do the math, right? 6 times, that's 100 and some bluegills per family every week. So a lot of bluegills went out of there, right? And it was like years and years, but there was fish that were, topping 2 pounds back then. I mean, I never cleaned any, but I got to hold like 1 pound, 14-ounce bluegills, and they're just an amazing creature. They're just like as tall as they are long, and they're probably 2 inches wide, and and now they're gone. And that's sort of, it was in, I think back then, talking with DNR people, they took panfish for granted. They're just take care of themselves, right? Well, pretty soon, we wiped them out on a lot of the lakes, and now it's hard to find big fish. But yeah, I'm guilty of butchering lots of them. And I look back, and it's kind of sad in a way.
Well, yeah, it's obviously
who
a
knew?
new era now, and
Yeah.
so things have changed. So I mean, when you think about the idea of handling a nearly 2-pound bluegill, I mean that's like handling seems like in these days handling a 22-pound walleye or a 65-inch muskie. It's like
right.
Totally another universe of a unicorn, a fish that doesn't exist. So why, you have some really great insights on this that I think would be beneficial for people to understand, kind of about these population dynamics with bluegills where, walleyes, it might not be that big of a deal to harvest some fish, they can rebound. But when you lose big bluegills, it doesn't seem like they just come back overnight.
Yeah. So now I work with our Minnesota DNR. We have different work groups now. They have citizens get together with them to talk about ideas, problems, what we should work on. And you're in the technology one. I've been in the panfish work group now for almost 10 years. And the big thing is what can we do to get big bluegills again? So we got the whole history of, the life histories of the bluegills and the crappies, and they're totally, they're both panfish, they're both nest builders, but they're two totally different fish. They spawn differently, they react to pressure differently, and our goal was to figure out how to bring them back. And I guess what I learned was that once you remove all the big fish, everybody thinks it's genetics. I know you wanted to talk about genetics, and it sounds great, right? But every DNR guy I've talked to says genetics is obviously important, but genetics has nothing to do with stunting panfish. It's like you're removing the biggest fish from the system, and the littler fish in the system respond by becoming sexually mature sooner. So all of a sudden, they don't need to grow as big to spawn, right? So all of a sudden, instead of having this population of big fish that kind of controlled the spawning grounds and were around for a long time, you have this giant mass of medium to small size fish. Instead of taking 5 years or 6 years to sexually mature, now they're sexually mature at 2 years old and 3 years old. So they're like, I don't need to grow big to spawn, so I'm just going to be small and spawn. And then all of a sudden, poof, you got, millions of little fish. So to get that balance back is really, really hard.
Yeah.
So the thinking is that if you're removing giant male bluegills from the system only, you're eventually going to knock them all down, and then you're going to have little fish. So the idea is to keep less fish and keep the bigger fish in the system.
Yes.
Is the technology and thinking on that right now. So that's where wanting to reduce bag limits, which happened. It went from 30 to 20. And then the next thing we thought would be good is if we could get a few lakes where there was slot limits. I know you've said that would, in your mind, that would be the best thing too. We were all like, let's get a few lakes we can try where they can only keep a certain amount over a certain length. But back when we were talking about it, it just wasn't, it wasn't going to be, there wasn't going to be buy-in from the anglers. It was going to be frowned upon. So they would, even if the reg was on, they wouldn't do it. Well, now we've did the 5 fish limits on a bunch of lakes, which was meant to maintain or even grow the size bigger of the big fish. People are seeing it working now. It's like in its 7th year now, and like lakes that had 9-inch bluegills are starting to see 10-inch bluegills, and it's like, it's a slow process, but it is helping because you're keeping the bigger fish in the lake because not as many are going out. And I think a lot of people would avoid those lakes too. It's like, well, I'm not going to go to a lake to keep 5 sunfish. Mm-hmm. But now they're going to them to keep 5 sunfish because they want to catch a quality fish.
Yeah, or maybe not to keep them because it's one of the few places where those trophy bluegill or quality bluegill experiences exist.
Right. So there's no magic bullet to it because they're just a different fish and they're hard to. But so much time went by of harvesting bluegills and taking them for granted back in the 70s, 80s, up to the early 2000s. And then it was finally, whoa, we don't have hardly any lakes around here with big sunfish anymore. So what do we got to do to bring them back? And so that's kind of the work we've been doing with them and trying to get the different regulations passed to kind of bring back the big sunfish. And it is kind of fun, like now with social media. I'm not a big social media guy, but I'm look on
some creeping around on social media.
I do some just a Facebook creeper basically. But yeah, no, but it's like funny to see dudes on their ice fishing like, oh, I got a 10-inch bluegill, man, this is so cool, I've never caught one before. And it's like, I'm thinking back when I was a kid, like that was like whatever, it's show me a 12-inch bluegill. 10-inch bluegills were like everywhere. It's like, so now a 10-inch bluegill is like a big deal, right? So it's like how much things have changed. So I think people are starting to respect that fish again.
It's awesome you brought up that point of those selective pressures that anglers can put on a fishery, and having reduced harvest in those larger size fish ultimately improves the overall quality of that particular fishery. So,
right.
It's definitely the idea that you guys are going with, trying to protect the larger sunfish, I think is great. And, back to your point, like these things don't happen overnight. I mean, the amount of time, energy, effort that you've put into this over years and years and years and years, have got you to some, good places with the 5 and the 10 fish bags, reduced bags. But, your ultimate goal into this was to protect the big fish. And, it's still, by the time this happens, it's a long ways down the road. So anybody listening to this who is concerned about or wants to maintain a quality bluegill fishery would certainly encourage people to release all of the larger bluegills that you catch, because they have a big impact.
And that's hard to do. You get especially if you're...
Especially for you. I know.
Killing fish is my middle name, man. No, I actually have a really hard time keeping a big bluegill. I really do. If I'm with my buddies who love to keep them, and I'll catch a 9-incher and, have a bunch of 8 and handful of 8 1/2s to eat. I'll catch a 9 1/4. I'm like, well, I'm going to let this one go. And they're like, well, why are you throwing that one back? That's a perfect eater. I'm like, well, if you want to catch a 10-incher, you got to let a 9-incher go, right? So in our meetings recently, we pushed so hard for the slot, and it was general public and the DNR enforcement were sort of against measuring fish 10 years ago. Like, who's going to measure a bluegill? Like, really? Now we're measuring bluegills? But now that we're seeing the success of the 5 fish limits, and now with walleyes and everything having to be measured, people are used to measuring fish. So now it's become acceptable enough in the public mind to do that. So now next year in Minnesota, there's going to be 5 lakes that have a experimental reg, not a permanent, but experimental on. You can still keep 20 bluegills, but you can only keep 5 over 8 inches. So you're going to be forced to measure bluegills. So you can still keep a bunch of smaller fish if you want for a meal, but this lake has the historical potential to grow big bluegills. There's not as many of them there now. So now let's see if we force people to measure fish. If, over the next 10 years, if you'll see a big increase in the size of the fish. So it'll be interesting. That's the initial reg we wanted from the beginning. But like I said, it was socially unaccepted. And it's interesting. A couple of the guys, Dave Weitzel up in Grand Rapids and Jeff Reed in Glenwood, they're 2 of the DNR guys on our panel, and they're great guys. And they've been keeping an eye on all this stuff, and they just said, well, now I'm seeing people around here. When we first put this regulation on a lake, I got so much flack, like, what are you doing? This is a stupid reg. And he said, now I have people, lakeshore owners on lakes that don't have the reg, coming to me and say, hey, can we put this on our lake too? I was just over at the lake next door that has it, and I caught a whole bunch of really big sunfish, and ours are not. Can we do that too? So it's like, it takes a while for people to buy in, right? But when they do, it works. So
yeah, I think that's cool that social perception has changed, and that it's not it's not just keep, and people value that, and that's really really cool that you guys have been able to make that shift in angler attitudes towards releasing those bigger bluegills. And so as you're looking at the slot size, there is more public support currently than there would have been, you think, 10 years ago?
Absolutely. Yep. It was, in fact, we even spoke to our local game warden who was in the last group, and I know he said, 10 years ago, boy, that was the last thing we wanted to do was that. But now it's like we're just measuring so many fish, with the pike, the hammer handle pike regs in the area and the walleye regs in the area, some bass stuff. It's like we're measuring fish. It's like every time we check somebody, we're measuring fish. So what's another species, right? So it seems to be, it's okay now, I guess. So
everything takes time. It's a slow moving process, but I'm happy that you're out there fighting the good fight, Mikey.
Yeah, it's been fun to see. And I, even having the little bit of a biology background, I've been learning so much, and it just kind of helps me to explain, because now people ask me all the time, and I want to get it right and explain why. And I, have, even though I'm quote unquote a meat packer in your mind, a fish killer, but I got a couple buddies that are really fish killers, and I actually had one of them the other day say, wow, I caught a couple 9 1/2s and I threw them back. You'd be proud of me. And I'm like, I am.
Yeah, you should be.
You've never thrown one back like that before. So
just so we're clear, Mikey likes to harvest fish, but he's not really a true meat packer. We just like to give him a hard time about it. Let's switch gears here a little bit to crappies, because and that same train of thought they were going down with management, because these have definitely different reproductive strategies, life histories, bluegills and crappies.
Correct.
And so it's not necessarily the same thing if you're harvesting 12-inch a reasonably large sized crappies, it's not like it takes decades and they're gone, right? So can you kind of dive into that whole crappie?
So
analogy?
that's the one thing about the bluegills is they spawn over a longer period of time. You'll see some sunfish spawning Memorial Weekend. I mean, I've heard of guys seeing fish on the beds in the 4th of July, right? But it seems like crappies are more temperature dependent, and they've got a window of when they spawn, and it's either it's good or it's bad, right? So if I guess I'll use up here again as an example, some of our lakes up north of here by Walker, it seems like Memorial Weekend is, traditionally like people Memorial Weekend, I got the crappies in the beds, right? So they've got their window. They spawn. If there's a cold front comes through for 4 days, the water temp drops or whatever, they leave the bed. The eggs, they have unsuccessful hatch. So I guess they're considered cyclical spawners. So they might have a bumper hatch one year, right? And then they'll have 3 years in a row where they don't. So you'll have one huge year class of crappies, and then 4 years later you'll have another one. So you'll be out on your lake, you'll be catching a bunch of 12 inches and a bunch of 8 or 9 inches. So people will go get on a hot bite and they'll just clobber the crappies in a lake, and I can't catch any nice crappies. Well, 3 years later they're there again, so they can handle it. They get left alone, and they're just, with the cyclical nature of them, the harvest doesn't seem to affect them like it does the bluegills for the the hierarchy and the spawning. So
I mean, I think those are important things for people to keep in mind, that like harvesting, it's not the same. You know what I mean? It's not the same idea. Like harvesting a 40-inch northern pike from a north central Minnesota lake is a super special fish that has a ton of ecological value.
Right.
But harvesting a big bluegill has that same value. Where a 12-inch crappie, I mean, obviously the fish has value. It has value to be recycled within the fishery, but in terms of like it affecting the overall population size structure, the reproductive potential of the fishery, it's not necessarily there. So I'm not encouraging people to go hammer down on a bunch of fish, but crappies, are one of those fish that seem to be able to rebound and don't have those long-term sustained.
Correct.
Size.
They're more durable, I guess, would be. So I still wouldn't. I'm still partial to releasing big crappies too, and it kind of to each his own. But I'm not a big fan of like going in the bulrush beds when they're spawning and just plucking. It's like 20 years ago or whatever, when we didn't know as much, it was whatever. But now it's like we show people how to fish, and we've talked about here's where you catch crappies when they're spawning, and so now everybody knows where they are and can go do it. So it's like, I think some lakes get really hammered. We were talking earlier, though, there's times of the year when you can, like summer for crappies is tougher, but early spring and then bedding time, crappies take a beating. I mean, probably the most crappies get caught there between that period and ice fishing. If you can just lay off them when they're on the beds, it would help your lake out, I guess, is the point. So
yeah, exactly. Just having more fish available to catch throughout the year. And our buddy Brad he's on a lake in north central Minnesota that has some really big crappies in it. And to your point, on Memorial Weekend, they nest right off his dock. He's got these big magnum giant crappies show up. He looks at them one morning, the next afternoon, pontoon shows up and
gone.
Gone.
I think the one year he went out there and he counted 32 crappies on beds. This was like the Friday before Memorial Weekend. He just floated his pontoon over the reeds and counted 32 beds of crappies. And by Monday morning, it was bare. There wasn't a crappie in it. So it's like, it kind of sucks, but they don't just all bed in one spot. So, which saves bigger lakes like that. And, as far as the management stuff too, some of the lakes that get harder too, our group had lobbied for reduced bags on crappies too on some of the heavier fished lakes, and they've done that. And similar thing. I think it's been, people grumble at first, but it's been received fairly well now. It's like, well, yeah, I want to go. I mean, 12-inch crappies is a pretty good haul, right? I mean,
it just does seem like angler attitudes have shifted away more from being so harvest oriented. Being the complete measure of fishing success to, really wanting a quality angling experience. But obviously the harvest component's still part of it. Yeah. But it doesn't necessarily have to be, giant coolers packed full heading home anymore. Right. So, well, one thing I wanted to hit on a lot of these kind of mesotrophic lakes throughout the upper Midwest have an issue with stunted northern pike and stunted bluegill populations. Are there some relationships between the two, and what insights have you guys seen on that?
Yeah, I don't want to go too deep because I don't know the fine details, but I know in our group when we first started, there's a correlation between perch, pike, and bluegills in lakes. So they kind of check each other in a way. So when there's a healthy population of all three, there's no problems, right? So then you remove the pike, which has happened over the years. So all of a sudden you have a lake that has a balanced pike population, and now it's full of 18 to 20 inch pike, and there's thousands of them in a lake. Well, they all got to eat, right? And what do they like to eat more than anything? Yellow perch. So now your perch population crashes. So, you look at the survey of the lake and there's hardly any perch caught. And the word on the street is too that the abundant perch, if the lake has abundant perch, they kind of keep the bluegills in check because they eat a lot of young of the year bluegills. So if there's a big bunch of bluegills, so you've kind of got this whole chain of events happening. So you put one out of whack and it can put all of them out of whack. So I know and when you were at the meeting too, but we talked about the north central zone here in the pike regs, and it's really just like the panfish or the bluegills. It's hard to get big pike back. People like big pike, and if your lake's full of small pike, it doesn't matter how many you take out. It just doesn't seem to help unless you're also keeping the bigger pike in the lake. You need to get X amount of big pike to the medium and then the big size that help keep the smaller pike in check. But if you just have a lake full of tons of little hammer handle pike, it's probably never going to change, so.
Yeah, it just does seem like that you just can't break that vicious cycle. I mean, there's real value to having, big predators in those ecosystems, the native predator, big muskies, big walleyes, big northern pikes. I mean, it seems like that, of course, just has an influence on the overall quality of the fish community. There's been a lot of research to support that, and I know people used to think that, whatever, they're eating all my walleyes, they're eating all the crappies, but really they have. I mean, that's what's setting the tone for the quality of the fishery, and the perch thing too. I just wanted to hit on that. That was kind of cool that so many of these perch, like they're just a dominant forage species for a ton of critters, but they've just shown up now in so many lakes as just like minnows, like maturing, like ultra tiny, and that's a crazy phenomenon. Are you guys in your panfish group looking at perch too?
We are, yeah. They officially gave us perch as a panfish as a species, so we've been sort of talking about it, and there's one of the gals in Brainerd has been doing a study on it too. But yeah, that was a big thing. It's like, why are there so many small perch? Where are the big perch? And again, it's a stress phenomenon. When you remove all the big fish from the big perch from the lake, the reaction is, well, we better start spawning here or we're going to disappear, right? So all of a sudden we're seeing the perch that are, I could have sworn they said in a couple of the lakes, year zero perch. So like a perch is an egg in April, hatches, and by fall, when it's sampled in a net, it has gonads. It's like, will be sexually mature the following spring, which is crazy, that's, so according to, the DNR people, that's a stress, a sign of stress. So, you don't want that. It's like, what's our buddy Andy's quote? Why should I grow big if I'm just going to get harvested?
Right. Yeah. Right. They're just avoiding those selective pressures from anglers.
Right. So it's just a biological mechanism, right? So
yeah. And once they're mature, they just don't grow fast. I mean, that's the whole thing, is you really want to prevent those fish from maturing young so you can get as much growth into the fish. I mean, that's what the anglers want, and but fish are so cool and they're so adaptable. It's not necessarily that it's the outcome that anglers want, but knowing that, these fish, northern pike, for example, I mean, if a system could support 100 pounds of northern pike biomass, if it was 5 20-pounders,
or 101 pounders,
or 101 pounders, like they're holding that ground and they can just respond. It is pretty remarkable, but shifting it back to the big ones has been a real challenge.
You just think of it, if you're eating and not reproducing, you're growing. If you're eating and putting all that energy into making eggs, then you're not growing. So that's how it works, I guess. So it's like something to think about, right? And,
Yeah, it is. And before we wrap up here, I just don't feel like it would be a real fishing conversation these days if we weren't talking about forward-facing sonar. The
Your
only
favorite.
conversation that anybody talks about. I'm kind of curious to get the take on, the panfish world, what their thoughts are on the technology, if they think it's, how they feel the benefits are, what they feel like some of the concerns may be, and where that whole world sits.
You were involved too, but we did the barotrauma thing, and amazingly, we were able to find the crappies with forward-facing sonar, right?
Yeah.
So, I guess when I went into it, I mean, where I'm exposed to it with our group here because it's what we do, and the panic button went off for me right away. It's like it's just going to be, death and destruction, and
There's that negativity we like to hear from Mikey.
okay, I'm heading down that path right now. Here we go.
All right.
If you know what you're doing with forward-facing sonars in the wintertime, you will find crappies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a good angler and you like harvesting crappies, you will catch lots and lots of crappies, right? So that was my concern, was like you're on the musky thing and we're worried about that. But to me, the next fish in line to get exploited by forward-facing sonars would be crappies because of where they live, right? So it doesn't matter much in the spring or the summer, but the fall and winter in a lot of our lakes up here, and I think in reservoirs down south too, and rivers around here, but they do go deep, right? And they suspend over deep water, and you can't miss them, right? If they are, I always tell people that if I it's kind of a little cocky, but I said if I have a new lake and I know there's crappies in it, and I get one little tip of information on like what part of the lake they're in, I will find them, right? I'll go out there and I'll cut holes and I will find the crappies. And I did that this winter. I got a lake I'd never fished before. A buddy said, yeah, my buddy's kid was up there and got some nice crappies, and it's like a lake 10 minutes from my house. I'm like, oh, cool. And I go out there and I'm like, I looked everywhere. I found a few, not much. I'm like, okay, this whole lake's deep, so it's a lot of work by myself. But I said, just throw me a bone, like what corner of the lake. So I got that. Fourth hole I cut, just crappie nirvana. I just went out, cut a hole, found them with the forward-facing sonar. Within a half an hour, I had my tent. They were deep. Mm-hmm. They were dead. I mean, they were going to die right from the barotrauma. They were in 40 feet of water, 30 feet down. They came up, but I'm like, okay, I'll see how fast I can get my 10 crappies. So if I'm Joe Meatpacker, I can do this every day, right? I can just go. But the reality is, people are still learning how to use the technology, so they're not everybody is dialed into using it and to its capabilities like we are. Or I'm not saying like we're experts, but it's like we know how to use them really good, and some people are still figuring it out, so they don't know how to quite use it. So that's supposedly holding it back. But my personal opinion is it's like, crappies are extremely exploitable with forward-facing sonar. Mm-hmm. And I've seen it with my friends and us and numbers of people. Like if they're here, we will find them. It's not like if we find them, it is we will find them. And I challenge any other panfish heads out there to contradict that. It's like, if you know how to use a forward-facing sonar, you will find crappies in open water. Right?
Yeah. I mean, so. It really is. It really is that simple. And when you look at crappies over the years too, it's not like basin crappies weren't fished out 50 years ago. I mean, a cup of coffee at the cafe, sharing that information.
Where are the permanent fish houses?
Drag a skid house out there, get your jiggle stick, a bucket of minnows. I mean, people did that, but I mean, I think where we're getting at here is that now the rate of information exchange is fast. You can get information quickly, and you have all these layers of technology, the mapping, the information to go to that particular body of water, a sweet electric auger, and then you drop this tool down, and I mean, you see it with this technology too. It gives you some real insight, is that when you can punch a hole and say, well, there's crappies 40 feet over that way. When the auger breaks through, the fish scoot 10 feet over that way. So if it was old school, you think about how many basins you might have checked years ago where you're drilling, you drop your flasher down there and you'd be like, oh, nothing. Yeah. You could have been around them
the whole time,
and they were just bouncing from that noise. But now it's just, you just know. Of course, you don't catch fish every time. Catch rates are variable, but in terms of efficiency and the frequency in which anglers can be successful on those critters, it is unlike any time in history.
Yeah, it's really shot forward, really exponentially. I think it's, everybody's always said, well, there was the green box, and then there was the Vexilar, and then there was the map, and then there was the camera, and it's like all advancing technologies, and everybody thought it was doomsday, and now we're here with forward-facing sonar, and I know you and I and Jeff have been talking about it a lot, and joke about it's the cheater pole and all that, but I think the jump from mapping and the side imaging we have to forward-facing is a big jump, right? It's like technology is amazing. Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, information is everything too, for information and education, right? So how do you combat that? Well, you got to educate people, right? So we did that barotrauma study to I think we proved pretty good that crappies caught out of deep water die,
Yeah, they don't do so hot. Not all of them die, but
nope, some.
Quite a
the
few.
deeper you go, the worse it gets. But if you're catching crappies over 25 to 30 feet, you're going to have some mortality. So now you've got this tool to find them, and everybody's like, "Woohoo! Let's go out and catch the crap out of the crappies." Well, it's like, well, wait a minute. Now, if you go out here, go for it. Catch them, but just catch your limit and go. Don't
or just what you need to eat.
Or what you need to eat, right? Yeah, but don't.
I know you're focused on limits, but some people just need what they need to eat.
10 crappies, no. But anyhow, so the information is like, well, wait a minute, I'm not going to sit here with my kid and catch 40 crappies now because I'm killing them. So if you get that information out there, and then the other thing is the DNR can also, on lakes that really get heavily exploited, they can drop the bag limit. But that's where we're at, right? So we know crappies in deep water are susceptible to barotrauma, and we know we can drop the limit to reduce harvest on it. So I guess now time will tell, right? So we have a bunch of lakes up here that have deep crappies and have a 5-fish limit. So it'll be interesting to see in 5 years or 10 years if the forward-facing sonar phenomenon does make a dent in them or not, or if people learn. But I'm being negative again. I'm kind of skeptical on people policing themselves. I have enough friends that are coming around, but they still don't want to quite. Why only 5 crappies?
Sure.
Or why only 4 walleyes? It's like, what's wrong with before? But
Mike, you did an awesome job with that whole barotrauma, the 2 videos that we have on AnglingBuzz's YouTube channel. If you want to check those out, they are really informative, and you did an awesome job setting that up. And of course, education is a big part of this messaging, because that's great if you guys decide to change the limit from 10 to 5. Mm-hmm. But if you're catch and release angling in these environments, it really doesn't matter if if they're biting and you're on them and you're releasing them.
If they're too deep, you're killing them anyhow.
So the message is really using that resource as a harvest opportunity. If you get a 6-inch crappie, take home a 6-inch. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, for sure.
And if you get a 15-inch crappie that you think is an amazing fish that you don't want to harvest, it's beautiful, but that's just part of the game,
Yep, for sure. So I like I say, it's a real tussle in your mind about what's good and bad, and like we use it for our work, and I enjoy using them. They're fun. I would say I like using the forward-facing sonar as much for finding habitat as I do for fish. But boy, now that you have this tool, right, and you're out there and you're like, well, now I got this. If I don't catch fish, I'm really a crappy fisherman, and it's like this thing, and you're the competitive thing. Like I got forward-facing sonar now. I can't go home and say I didn't catch any fish, right? But it's hard not to use. But I mean, I still go out. I know you do too, but I still go out plenty and just fish, and you can go bass fishing and not need it, right? Or you can, when the fish are up shallow, they don't work as well, right? Like in 5 feet of water, you're just kind of doing what you used to do, right? But boy, in certain situations, muskies in open water, crappies in open water, lake trout out on Lake Superior. Guys are sharpshooting lake trout in Lake Superior, and like this gigantic, huge, deep, gigantic lake, and they just drive around, and there's a mark, and there's another lake trout they pitch to. It's like they're catching 20, 30 lake trout a day. It's like amazing, right? It's like if you didn't have it, you couldn't do that. So
yeah, the efficiency goes up, obviously,
right.
big time. So yeah, I mean, it's just it's a complicated issue. To your point about being an amazing learning tool, which it is, and I think all of us are super concerned as the technology proliferates. The anglers become better at using it. What does the future of fishing look like when there isn't this mystery left over? Because it does. It does fundamentally change fishing.
For sure.
You couldn't know what was 30 feet in front of the boat, 2 feet under the surface before.
Yeah,
it was impossible to know. Now it's
possible.
Obvious. So
well, yeah, you hear the people.
It's different, and so
yeah, the Bassmaster Classic thing. They apparently every competitor in the tournament had it, right, and some guys still didn't, had blanked, right. Like a few of the guys did not catch a fish. So it's like.
Yeah, catch rates are variable no matter what the technology is that you have. It doesn't mean you automatically catch fish.
Yeah.
I'm just glad that the conversation's happening.
Yeah.
Anglers are voicing potential concerns with it, and just being able to stay on top of it to just be sure that we've got really good quality angling experiences in front of us. And there's plenty of situations where using the technology probably doesn't matter, and it's fine. So
I'll use my quote I use around here all the time that you guys are sick of, but with great power comes great responsibility. The old Spider-Man movie quote, but it's like, you got this great power in front of you. Don't abuse it, right? It's like, I think people are starting to appreciate big panfish again, like it's like kind of a cool, it's cool again to catch big sunnies, right? It's cool to catch, our buddy Hayes, like him and his buddies, those crappie chronicle guys, like they were out like hunting giant crappies, right? On these lakes that have huge crappies. Their goal was to catch a 16-inch crappie. Billy Lindner and Hayes went down to a lake in the cities and spent a day cutting hundreds of holes, live scoping, looking for a single fish, and they did it, and he caught a 16-inch crappie, which is amazing, right?
Insanity.
So it's like, and they weren't catching it to kill it. They were catching it to admire this giant fish, like that it exists, and say, wow, I caught a 16-inch crappie. But they could not have done that without, they would have spent 3 lifetimes just fishing normally to catch that fish. And they went out in one day and they chased this fish halfway around the lake, cutting holes in front of it, and then finally got it to bite, which is, I think to most anglers would be like, you're stupid. Like, that's crazy. Why would you do that? But when you're young and full of energy, I'm sure you and I would have done that when we were in our 20s too, right? It's like, holy crap, why not?
Yeah.
So, but just have a little, respect for the resource and be responsible, I guess, is my takeaway from all of this, and appreciate big panfish for what they are. They're not what they used to be from, quote unquote, back in the day. I wish, I know you've caught a few big sunfish. Like, I know that one lake we fish out west, you caught one that was probably we figured 1.5 pounds or something, right? But I mean, to hold a 2-pound bluegill in your hand. I mean, I got to see one on a table that a guy kept when I was a teenager, that to mount, right? Of course you're going to mount that,
Sure,
but it was like, it didn't look like a real fish.
Yeah.
You're used to seeing sunnies like this, but this fish, it was, sticking that high off the table. It just was an incredible fish. So to me, like, that fish was like you said, a 50-pound muskie. It's like, but so will we ever see that again? I'm hoping so. Where things are trending that way, but it's a long climb. So
yeah, it's amazing to think that. I mean, not that was ever a super common fish, but they were,
correct.
They were around, and it's that's super cool that they're there, and hopefully all your efforts on your panfish stuff, Mike, pay off. And the
cool
messaging we're trying to spread here about a little bit more selective harvest and understanding, what's happening within the resource to make the best decisions that you can make when you're on the water. And So anything else you want to add to the discussion?
I can still really clean panfish good.
He is good.
I'm not bragging, but I'm kind of bragging. But I can clean crappies about as fast with a regular knife as anybody. So
he is a master, and he definitely has that. He's the Mike the fishmonger around here. And so I mean, well, just if you looked at our YouTube channel and just looked at any of the harvest or cleaning videos. Ta-da! Mike Hehner.
I don't know why
17 ways to clean a catfish.
Jeff just keeps pushing me to do cleaning videos. I just don't understand why.
It's your talent. You get a lot of practice, man. It's great. I love it.
It's fun stuff. So,
yeah. No, I appreciate you having this conversation, Mike. And the one thing, not that you don't know this, but got you another little fresco up there on the wall. The
big pike.
The big jack from Baker's Narrows in Manitoba. That was
yes, sir.
That was cool. So we
appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, they're super great. If people haven't seen these, it's a magnetic photo tile, so we can replace that. That tile's on the wall, and for low cost, you can just swap out those pictures and put whatever you want up there. So it's a cool system. So
when I catch my 2-pound bluegill, it'll be up there.
Boom. Yeah. Well, we didn't have a picture like that to throw out there. Just a beauty jack, and you actually let that one go too, I think.
I did. Yeah. Yes, I did. So it's a good conversation. I think in the future it'd be fun to talk about the other different ways to catch panfish. You started doing that X-Wrap stuff in the spring, which is incredible, and guys get them in the fall now, crappies, in basins with the boat and find them, and it's really fun. So there's a lot of new horizons on panfish fishing to you just don't have to go with a bobber and a jig or a bobber and a worm anymore. There's a lot of different technology and techniques out to catch sunfish and crappies. So.
Yeah, it's super fun. Because of that, I've gotten way more into pan fishing the last 5 years or so, just because it's a lot more. It's just entertaining, and sometimes it's just really fun to go catch a lot of fish.
It is for sure.
Yeah, you want to feel like a good fisherman every once in a while. So, yeah, well, that's great, Mike. Thanks for coming on here. And if you are watching this episode on television, there is a long version available on Angling Edge's YouTube channel. Check out the Angling Edge Buzz on YouTube, or you can check out all of our social media channels, and you can listen where you find podcasts. Thanks for watching.